Well, I did it. I finished Invincible. Wait, I haven't even told you that I started reading Invincible. Oh god, this is going to be a long one. Okay, I'm going to have to take my head out of my thoughts about the final volumes and take it all the way back to the start to tell you about Invincible. Okay, hang on, give me a second. I watched Invincible Season 1 back when it first came out on Amazon Prime, and I have not been keeping up because I have not had a Prime subscription since. However, I recently decided that I wanted to break out of reading purely Marvel and DC comics, and I decided to pick up a Global Comics subscription, which contains a lot of Image Comics, and Image Comics, of course, contains Invincible. And the best thing about Invincible is the same thing that's great about, The Umbrella Academy and The Boys, the shows. I haven't read the comics. But it's the same thing that's great about out-of-continuity Marvel and DC comics. It's the fact that it is its own self-contained thing, and therefore instead of having to be an ongoing title that lasts for decades and decades and decades, and therefore you have to be very careful about what you can permanently change, instead you can take this superhero genre we all know and love and do something new with it. You can make it a transformative story with actual stakes and consequences. And for the most part, that is exactly what is achieved here in Invincible. And I'll warn you now, I'm going to try and keep spoiler-free for a while, for people who are just watching the show, so that I can kind of talk about it without requiring you to have read 25 volumes of Invincible. But, just over the course of me talking about what I love about it, I will accidentally give hints, I'm sure. But yeah, the great thing about Invincible, I would say, is that time passes and we get to see so much character growth, not just in a positive upward direction, but up and down. Invincible spends a lot of time dealing with issues of morality and redemption and forgiveness and what is the uncrossable line and what damage cannot be reversed. How far should one truly be allowed to go in the name of the greater good? And we see it all through the lens of Mark Grayson, a kid who gains superpowers through his Viltrumite heritage and, makes mistakes. I'm sure anyone who knows anything about Invincible already knows this, but there is an element of primal horror to this comic where it's the kind of world where punching someone with a superpowered punch is going to make them explode into blood and guts, and then you're going to have to deal with the fact that you're covered in their blood and guts, and that you have just ended someone's life, and was that, was that justified? Did you do the right thing? What does that mean for you as a person? That's not a specific example of a thing that happened, by the way, that's just the tone that we're establishing here. Because in many ways, Invincible is a deconstruction of superhero tropes. But here's the thing. That's a 4 out of 5, right? Here's the thing that makes this comic a 5 out of 5, consistently. It isn't just a deconstruction of superhero tropes, it is also a celebration of superhero comics, and it is unashamedly one of them. In early volumes, it very much feels like a pastiche comic. You look at certain characters, especially like background or supporting cast characters, and you think, okay, this person's meant to be the Iron Man character, this person's meant to be the Hulk character. There are some times when it gets incredibly on the nose. But the longer the story goes on for, the more it establishes itself as its own thing, and you realize that the world that's being built isn't just there as a commentary on other superhero comics, it's there to be its own world, and you do get around to these stories with supervillains being, a menace and a threat to humanity, and the heroes that thwart them and what it costs and the consequences of all of that as its own superhero story, without just being like, here's how it would actually go. So not only are we re-examining the superhero landscape and the kinds of stories that are told, but we are also doing so within a universe that we ourselves are invested in as a superhero universe that is worth paying attention to and enjoying. Okay, now that I've driven that point pretty thoroughly home, let's start examining plot specifics, which means I am going to get into talking about spoilers here. So if you have not watched any of the show, you might want to go away. If you've watched the show, you might still want to go away. Just know that you have so much good viewing in your future, because I've seen season 1 and I know that they build upon the best elements of the comic while uplifting some of the things that could have been improved, and from what my friend has told me, they continue to do that. So as long as they continue to do that in a healthy way, honestly, the show might end up being the best version of Invincible, and there's still so much of it left to go. And it's a hell of a ride. I was waiting for it to let up in quality, and it just doesn't. But sorry, yes, plot specifics. Mark Grayson, our protagonist, is a half Viltrumite, half human, and for a minute we think he's just a son of Superman-style character. We see Omni-Man as this Superman-style character, and then, of course, the thing most people probably know about Invincible by now, the shock turn when Omni-Man murders the Guardians of the Globe. Why did he do that? Well, the Viltrumites, it turns out, are a warrior race who believe in the supremacy of might above all things and are set on conquering the universe. And also, have been sent to various worlds to try and interbreed with other races because their numbers have dwindled after being wiped out by a scourge virus. I'm not just going to sit here and tell you the entire plot to Invincible, but yeah, that's our basic premise here. And talk about the trauma of this comic. We see Mark Grayson and his mother, Debbie, try to deal with discovering that Omni-Man, Nolan, who has always seemed like this normal and good part of a family, this good dad, this supportive husband, actually turned out to be a piece of shit. And that's pretty much what I understood from season 1. And so I was really interested when I got past that part of the comic, and we end up a little bit later on, to be fair. I think it's like by volume 6, so there's like 3 volumes of like no Nolan stuff. The comic then goes about, exploring, well, can you come back from that? And I go, no, you can't come back from that. What the hell are you talking about? And the comic's like, but what if that was just his Viltrumite programming, kind of like telling him that he should be doing that after, he basically has a nervous breakdown, right? After he realizes that actually he is acclimatized to Earth and humanity and realized that there is a better way than what his Viltrumite Empire wants him to do, but he has to fulfill his duty. The Viltrumite Empire is right, so he's torn between the two. And if conquering and murdering and all that has been the only thing you have ever known, is there a redemption for you when you finally embrace that all that humanity has taught you again? Like, this comic doesn't want you to be comfortable with right and wrong. This comic doesn't want you to be comfortable with the idea of forgiveness. It really pushes the idea that forgiveness is difficult. If I have to levy a criticism at it, I would say that Debbie forgives Nolan a little quickly, and most of that happens off-screen, off-panel, I guess I should say. I hope that's something that the show fixes. But I did love when Mark first saw Nolan again for the first time after everything, and you think he's gonna like fight him because he's not expecting to see his dad, but the first thing he does is hug his dad and cry, and I'm like, yeah, okay, that makes sense. Yeah, I know, I get it, but also that's a very human reaction. That makes sense, because how do you hate the guy who's been a good dad for like 18 years of your life, and then turns out to be a villain, and then he's saying, hey, I'm trying to be better now. Are you just gonna and obviously that's not easy. That's a rocky road. We do see most of that difficult coming to terms with both sides of the situation from Mark's perspective. But yeah, then we also meet Oliver, Mark's younger brother, who was conceived with someone from another race and ends up aging super quickly due to it because of some sci-fi mumbo-jumbo, which ends up being pretty convenient for the plot. Looks at Robert Kirkman. It's justified pretty well within the text, let's be real. And, this is kind of his take on the Batman and Robin situation, right? Like having a kid psychic in a world where there's all this violence and trauma and bloodshed, and also he wasn't raised on this world when we take him back to Earth, and how is his response to humanity going to be different for it? And we also see Mark struggling with his morality because he's forgiven his father, but his father has still done terrible things, and there's this villain that holds him to account for the terrible things that his father did. And so Mark starts questioning whether he's a bad person, and, some of that Viltrumite kind of philosophy does get through to him through Oliver, and he is asked, like, are you not superior to humans? Should you not be ruling them with an iron fist? Is it not your duty to take over the world like the Viltrumites want you to? And while we sit here as a reader going, obviously, no, that's terrible, Mark does have a moment of going, dude, maybe. And that's what's really interesting about Mark Grayson. As I said, he has up moments and he has down moments. He is not an outright hero. He is not someone who gets things right all of the time. We see that especially when he messes up with Dinosaurus. He's 18 What does he know about the world? He's figuring this stuff out with the rest of us. Hell, I know if I was the strongest, most superpowered person in the world at 18 years old, I would have made some pretty bad decisions. Not because I was a bad person, but because they were how I thought the world should have been fixed at the time. Oh god, it would have been an unmitigated disaster. And I think that's where I really like his relationship with Cecil Stedman, the head of the oh god, what is it? It's not the Global Defense Agency. I mean, I guess it's the CIA, but you know, that guy. It's really interesting how for the longest time we see Invincible working hand in hand with Cecil, and we see Cecil treating him like, you know, being really friendly and stuff, but then we also see Cecil working with villains off the side, and there's this slowly building tension of like, when's Mark gonna find out about this? When's Mark gonna find out about this? When's it all gonna go south? And when it goes south, it goes south. You've also got the steadily building threat of the Viltrumites, which I really enjoyed, and because, you know, that pays off. That's not just something that like is building in the background and then kind of you know, shows up at the end of the comic and then it's the big final fight and that's the end of it. No, routinely here and there they show up and bad shit happens, and you know, they're, I guess, like any comic villain, they are a recurring villain. Honestly, I think one of the things that's always going to stand out to me is one of my favorite, most shocking parts of this book, because you're always like, where are you going to go after having Nolan killed the Guardians of the Globe? That really sets the tone, that sets the promise for what this story is going to be, right? Like, you know, shocking things are going to happen and it's going to be bloody and traumatic and horrible, and you're going to be dealing with a fallout of those events for a very long time. How many more of those can you fit into the book before it starts to get repetitive? And how can you make it bigger and better and crazier and more enthralling than ever before? Enthralling? That's not the right word. I guess it is the right word. And for me, I think the best use of that kind of plot device has to be Angstrom Levy and the army of Invincibles from other dimensions, because, first of all, that ties back into Mark Grayson's moral quandary of, am I a bad person if every other version of me is evil? But yeah, god, the fucking volume when all of the evil marks show up and basically destroy the world just had my jaw on the floor. Just the amount of death and destruction it caused. The one thing I will say is we do get a fake out with Atom Eve's death, and I'm still not entirely sure how I feel about that. I guess it's a little bit like A Song of Ice and Fire, right? Like, they establish this kind of grimdark world where nobody is safe and anyone can die, and then when you start bringing people back from the dead, or when you start having them, like, in a state where you would assume that they can't come back alive, and they do. How do you feel about that when it happens later in the story? Does it kind of reset the stakes a little bit? Does it suddenly make people less likely to die? Because I did run into that. I think it was volume 22 or so. There was a moment where someone had this absolutely grievous injury, and I thought 10 volumes ago I would have been really scared. But I'm just sat here like, how do they get back from this one? I feel like it did damage the threat a little bit, the tension just a little bit over time, knowing that Atom Eve could regenerate her body when she was on a state of almost dying, or knowing that the Viltrumites were really, really tough to the point where they could heal up from being almost ripped in half, or having a hand through their guts. However, this is going to jump to the very end of the comic, so if you are hanging around being like, okay, he's mostly talking about stuff that's happened in the show, beware ye who tread here. Okay, I'm going to talk about it. Nolan's death towards the very end of the comic did kind of like settle me. I went, okay, there were consequences for the actions which happened, because for a minute it looked like they were going to bring him back from near death, and I was like, come on guys, we need to have some stakes. But yeah, sorry, all the way back to like halfway before that in the book, we had Conquest show up, and good god, what a fight. I love that he shows up at the worst possible time, when everyone is extremely demoralized because the Earth is a wreck, and you know, their friends are dead, and whose fault is it? Oh, I gotta mention Rexplode, by the way. Rexplode went out like a goddamn champ around this time in the book, exploding his own skeleton to defeat one of the evil marks. Oh my god, what a guy. And he becomes more and more likable as the book goes on as well, up until that point. Sorry, there are so many, like, details within each particular volume that I'm skipping over some of them because I can't remember it all immediately and we'll be here forever, but I did love how he and Mark basically saved the world in tandem with each other, but Rexplode, when he saved the world from the lizard men or whatever it was, that had to be kept a secret. But when he saved the world, I was like, my god, that man is legitimately a goddamn hero. I actually kind of like this guy. And then Robert Kirkman killed him, you bastard. And going back to the whole, like, moral quandary, morally grey, can you forgive people, can people change and grow, so on and so forth. Rexplode is presented as a pretty awful character from the beginning of the book because he cheats on Adam Eve, right? And yet by the end of his appearance in the book, I really like him. I guess if you like the whole Jaime Lannister character arc in Game of Thrones, I guess this is the book for you. I didn't think I'd be comparing this to Game of Thrones when I started recording, but here we are. Are you ready for like a take from 2000, like freaking 12? Hey guys, this book is like the Game of Thrones of superhero books. Anyway, where were we? Conquest, yes. Mark going up against Conquest is the first time we really see him kind of hold his own against a full-blooded Viltrumite, because up until this point we've seen his character growing in strength, and you're like, wait, is he really strong enough to take on Conquest, who's meant to be like this really strong Viltrumite? I do love the kind of shonen anime moment when it's revealed to Frag, I believe it was, that Mark defeated Conquest, and he was like, that cannot be. Conquest was the strongest of us. That would mean he would have to be... No, but he couldn't be, you know? Like, obviously foreshadowing his lineage of, like, the blood of the Emperor or whatever. Oh my god, we haven't even talked about Alan. Alan the alien. He's such a bro. I love him so much. And he has his own character arc throughout this book. He's not just, like, this supporting character who shows up and is the same kind of character all the way through the book. He goes from being, like, this almost jock type figure who, you know, is kind of patrolling various solar systems and checking out, like, for Viltrumite threats and stuff. I think that's what he was doing anyway. He ends up being, like, this, like, leader of a coalition of planets, and, like, he changes as a person. It's so fascinating to watch. Anyway, the Viltrumite War was fantastic. I was kind of surprised when we got there, because I was like, this feels like the kind of thing that you would build up to towards the end of the book. But here we are, and it's over kind of quickly, honestly. And, like, the Viltrumites... it felt like the threat of the Viltrumites was being scaled back a little bit around this time in the book, because we learned there were only 50 full-blooded Viltrumites left because of a Scourge virus and stuff, and really most of their power was just them bluffing that they had more people. And then of course our heroes kind of win, except then Frag holds planet Earth hostage, and has what I felt, to be fair, if I'm going to be like up and down about this book, if I'm going to give everything I feel about this book, I'm going to give this criticism. It felt a little quick, going from, we will destroy you and everyone you have ever loved, we are the Viltrumites, we will rule the universe, we are super powerful, yada yada yada, to, oh shit, okay, we're going to hide out on Earth, and if you come after us, we're gonna make trouble on Earth. We're cool with interbreeding with these people who we thought were below us, by the way, all of a sudden. Like, I guess... it's not all of a sudden, because that's why Nolan was sent there in the first place, but you definitely saw some disgust from, like, Frag, and from, oh my god, the horrible lady. Even she gets a redemption arc. Everyone gets a redemption arc. But yeah, one thing which I feel like happened off-panel a little bit too quickly as well, was the Viltrumites kind of, like... learning to be humans and learning that there's another way, much like Nolan did. It took that man 20 years, or the better part of 20 years, and it took these guys, like, what, a few months? It's the same when they have kids as well. Like, Mark Grayson's powers kick in when he's 18 or whatever, and then all these kids who are like 5 or 6, you know, they all get their powers. It's like, okay, we definitely had to speed things up a bit on the timeline here, didn't we? But you know, no story is perfect. He's a late bloomer, it's fine. But yeah, then we have the stuff with Dinosaurus, where Invincible decides, hey, villains, they just need us to help them get what they want, and then, then they're just fine, so we just gotta give them what they want. Dinosaurus, what did you want? You took out the entire city of Las Vegas, and it turned out to be a good thing. I'm gonna work with you. I'm gonna curb your worst instincts, and we're gonna make the world a better place. Oh, you've gone rogue, and you've set off explosions in Greenland, and now the sea is flooding some of the most populated cities on the coastal areas because you're worried about global warming. Whoops. That's a whoops from me. What I do think is interesting about that arc is Mark is presented as, this is part of his evolution of being a hero. He talks about he can foresee a day where he's not even in the costume anymore. He wants to talk to villains instead of punch them. And honestly, that does foreshadow his ultimate role as Emperor of the Viltrumites at the very end of his story. We see him being a kind of galactic mediator. So he does kind of get there in the end. But this initial outing of that, it's presented as like a positive thing, like he's reached some sort of Zen state. And then it's quickly shown that actually he didn't think this through. And oh dear, he's trying to usurp power from people who are a little bit more experienced than he is, and he's making mistakes they might not have, and actually it's a pretty bad thing. And then if I'm remembering my major beats correctly, we start getting to the plotline about robots now calling himself Rex, which I always thought was kind of weird, and never really goes away after this. And Monster Girl, whose real name I forget, that's not good. What was her real name again? Anyway, there's been this recurring threat of the Flaxons, who come from another dimension where time runs differently, and Robot and Monster Girl end up chasing them back into their home dimension and get stuck there and spend 700 years dealing with the Flaxon problem on the Flaxon side of things and become like the rulers of that world. And honestly, this is another one of my favorite parts of this book. It's absolutely fascinating. Robot's descent into villainy, and tyranny, and just what being 700 years old and having tasted power and coming back home and coming back to your old life and being less important and pretending that you're not 700 years old, what that does to a person. And unfortunately, he becomes the kind of person who thinks that the ends justify the means, no matter how awful the means might be. We see him brutally cut Cecil Stedman's throat and kill him right in front of Mark, and it's crazy watching him take over everything and enact what he sees as the greater good and succeed in enacting the greater good. And the further away we get from his murderous, hostile takeover, the more people are like, I mean, he had a point. The world's a better place now because he's basically ruling it. And again, you see this like deep philosophical dive into like, okay, but at what point does the cost outweigh the benefits? Even when it's something like this, at what point is it okay for someone to be an absolutely horrible person if it ends up embettering the world? I love that it gets to the point where like pretty much it's just Mark and Eve who hate him, and everyone else is like, come on guys, can't you let this go? Why can't you just let this go? And it's because, as it turns out, the aspect of being a human and not just cutting throats is kind of important, actually. And then you've got like the final few volumes of this book, which really are quite interesting and fascinating, where Mark and Eve end up departing Earth and going and living on what's it called? Telescria or something? Telescria? Living on an alien world because they can't stand to live on Earth anymore with Robot ruling it. And we see them bring up their daughter Terra, and it's, there's all these conversations about like, are we just hiding from our responsibility, or is that just a world which is going to cause more conflict if we're still on it? And you get this lovely kind of slice of life part of a story, and you see Mark get back into touch with Oliver, who's been living on Telescria. And then we have what's probably my least favorite volume out of the entire story, where I think they actually almost kind of dropped the ball a little bit in terms of the story that they're trying to tell and the themes that they're trying to get across here, and that was Reboot, which is where when they're trying to, track Frag and see where he's gone and stuff, Mark falls down a hole, meets another worldly being, and gets sent back to the very beginning of the story. And it's made clear to us quite immediately that this isn't an alternate dimension, this isn't an alternate universe, this is the same universe, but he's gone back in time and is setting it down an alternate timeline. And because of all of his foreknowledge, he is able to avoid the vast majority of awful and terrible and traumatic things which happen over the course of the entire story. Like, we get a really interesting sequence of events where he basically talks his dad down, like, it's still really difficult to do because a lot of that Viltrumite programming is still within Nolan's brain, and he thinks that this is what he has to do, but Mark mitigates the damage and kind of, stops the destruction before it begins. And it really does cement this idea that Nolan, was kind of acting out what he thought he had to do out of duty, and he's really glad that Mark stopped him. It is a devastating tale of what could have been, but we see that he hates his life because he's no longer with Eve. Some of the good that he does accidentally offsets her finding out that Rex is cheating on her, and therefore they never end up getting together, and he misses his daughter, and eventually the otherworldly entity gets back in touch with him and says, you are needed to correct this timeline because the world has fallen out of balance. Too many awful things have been happening, but you're doing a really good job of kind of like bringing things back into balance, bringing things back into order. There are far less awful, terrible things happening now. Well done. And Mark says, no, put me back. And the creature's like, but that means you would doom so many people, their deaths would all be on your hands. And he goes, yeah, but if I stay in this timeline, my daughter's never going to be born. Even if me and Eve do get together, we're not going to end up, having terror. That's just not how that works. Put me back, I don't care. Being a hero is bullshit, or whatever he said. And the otherworldly entity basically takes him back to his time and says, you're a disgrace. And I don't know how that sits with me. Because again, that's Robert Kirkman examining the themes of heroism and, the greater good and the human element. And I think going forward as well, there's not too much story left after this, but this really disillusions Mark to the idea of being a hero. But I think the story would have been just fine and maybe even better if this had never happened, or maybe it happened a little differently. I think this is my one fly in the ointment regarding Invincible as a whole. I don't know what it adds to the story, besides reminding us that Mark isn't quite the hero he should be. Like, I could see something like this happening far earlier in the book, and it would do good to help establish these themes of, it's this superhero universe where crazy traumatic shit happens, and, the weight of responsibility and heroism and all of that stuff. But at this point, Mark has reached a point in his character arc where, I don't know, I think we're past most of the struggling with morality phase. And I guess that's why he doesn't hesitate in saying, no, take me back to my timeline, I don't care the damage it causes. But I don't know that we needed to test him as a character like that, or to test our feelings about him as a character like that at this point in the story. And it just felt so kind of extraneous. It's mostly used to make a time skip occur, in which Mark's been away from his family for 5 years, and then, you've got time for a bunch of the Viltrumite kids to grow older, and you've got time for his daughter to grow older, and then you get back to some really interesting storytelling about him having been away for 5 years, and Eve ended up finding someone else, but that didn't work out, and what does that mean for their relationship, and that stuff was all really good again. And honestly, from there to the end of the book, it was just absolute cinema. I really hope you're not relying on me to tell you all of the events of Invincible here, because I forgot to mention earlier that at one point Nolan becomes Emperor. How did we get there again? Oh yeah, during the time period around a little after halfway through the comic, during the time period when Frag is holding Earth hostage, but you don't really hear much from the Viltrumites, there's this whole plotline where Oliver and Alan want to deliver the Scourge virus into Earth's atmosphere to kill off all the Viltrumites, even though there is a distinct possibility that it would kill off all the humans too. Another moral quandary. We sure do love those, don't we? And this is also when we deal with Oliver's kind of coldness towards humanity. And Mark accidentally gets exposed to it, and the only way to save him is for the Viltrumite faction to try and save his life. And that's when Frag discovers that he does have the DNA of that Emperor that got killed, which means, oops, Nolan's the Emperor, and Frag has to run away. And that's when Nolan's like, hey, I'm your new Emperor. I'm sure you've already noticed, but humanity's pretty neat, huh? We don't have to be evil. But yeah, all this time, Frag's been kind of stewing. He's also been busy making his own little army of children, which is kind of messed up because it's Invincible. And so now we got the big showdown, the big rumble. We got Frag v Invincible, and his dad and all that stuff. And how do you make that interesting? How do you not just make it the part where they win? Well, first off, you've got this standoff between Mark and Robot and how they are not friends. Mark makes the the morally questionable decision to lead the enemy Viltrumites to Earth in order to get the friendly Viltrumites of Earth to help to fight. Honestly, now that I think about it, I think Mark's final character at the end of this book is... he's a representation of balance, of someone who is okay making morally questionable decisions to serve the greater good, but knowing that you can't go too far with that shit, and the greater good does not always, justify the means. And I think there's this overt difference between Mark, who will put Earth in danger in order to get the Viltrumites of Earth to help fight to save the entire universe from the enemy Viltrumites, versus someone like Robot, who will be happy kidnapping all of the Viltrumites' kids and threatening to murder them all if the Viltrumites do not comply, because the outcome of a fight might go against him. They're both morally, dubious things, but one is more reprehensible than the other, because I suppose from Mark's perspective, if they fail to fight the enemy Viltrumites, Earth's gonna be toast anyway. There's this awesome fight. Nolan... the cool thing about Nolan's death is it's not instant. He gets ripped in half and it seems like we might be able to fix him, but then it turns out that his heart was damaged and he slowly dies in bed while talking to Mark about needing to be the next emperor, That actually carried emotional weight, and it wasn't just shock value, and it wasn't coming back from the brink of death because I'm a Viltrumite. That was really well done. And also, this entire book, you've got this theme of fatherhood, and, how important a father figure is. And Mark has this really heart-stirring speech about how, your entire life, when you're looking towards the future, you have your father there kind of like in front of you, guiding you, and when you lose your father, suddenly you're all alone with the future, and that kind of terrifying feeling, which I have very thankfully yet to feel. But reading that, I just knew exactly what he was talking about. Anyway, the fight on the surface of the sun with Frag, that was really cool, and I loved as well how Robot sent his suit of armor towards Mark to help him fight off two enemies fighting together for the greater good. Hey, the greater good, there's that theme again. And we fight off Frag, and then we have a standoff with Robot. I don't need to tell you the events of the comic. I'm not going to go over them all over again, but it was a really good ending. I love how on the one side of things you've got this dramatic clash between alien forces out in space and on the surface of the sun, and also it's very poetic how Frag's army turns against him because he never loved any of them and he was treating them so disposably that he was wielding his Viltrumite children as weapons to batter Mark, which is just so... that is the most on brand. That is the most on brand a Viltrumite has ever been in this book. But also Mark had a very good inner monologue during the battle while he was thinking about, the difference between him and Frag, and how Frag was on this path of destruction, and how his kind of intentions for the Empire had always been hostile and self-destructive, and, how his were more... it didn't come across as sanctimonious or preachy, but it was a very good hero monologue. And I think the decision to have it so that his earpiece burns out and he can't actually talk to Frag, saying all of these things that he's thinking, is interesting, because Frag is so far beyond reason that he would never listen to it anyway. But yeah, the other half of it is just it kind of just feels like a sad struggle against Robot. Nolan's just died, Mark's gotta be emperor now, he wants to be with his family to figure this all out, and then you've got Robot who's, trying to act within his best interest, and I guess Earth's best interest from his point of view, and causing more conflict and trying to turn the Viltrumites against Mark again, and it's just a bit pathetic, and I think that perfectly sums up his character. But again, we've got Mark's way of solving the situation, which is not to kill Robot, but to take away his agency, and basically leave him as a brain in a jar and install the Immortal Man as ruler, and say that basically have Robot run ideas past you, and then you can go, hey, that's awful, or yeah, we should do that. Because Robot did, after all, bring the planet to a pretty good place, despite his awful ideas as well. Sorry, I'm just struck by the idea that I'm retelling the story and I'm not doing it justice at all as I tell it, because it was so good. But yeah, I think my favourite part about the ending of Invincible is the flash forward in time we get. When Mark takes his family and goes out, and then we see his son grow up a little bit and become Kid Invincible, and idolize his father and stuff, And then time keeps flashing ahead, and we see his daughter grow up, and we see her go out and do her own thing. And we see Mark get older and older and older, and we see Atom Eve, and she kind of like almost dies of old age, but then she renews her body, and it turns out she's basically immortal, which is cool. And we see it just keeps going, and I'm like, oh my god, it's not like a happily ever after. It shows that there are still moral quandaries, and there are still conflicts and stuff, but you see Mark grow up and become this emperor figure in truth, and you see him do so much good across the universe. You see him become the ultimate version of himself, I guess, and that's so cathartic to witness after so many volumes of watching him struggle with all of these things. And I gotta say, one thing I love about this book, it's a small thing, it's not like the big thing, it's a small thing, but there is a plot beat, god, probably volume 8, 9, 10, somewhere along those lines, but there's a plot beat where Mark gets taken into the future, the far future, and in the far future, he is going through this kind of like cyberpunk, like super advanced city to meet the ruler of the world, and it's the Immortal Man. And he's talking about like, oh yeah, last time I saw you, you were bigger, and you took your family off world, and you're living off world with your family and stuff. All of that comes true. That is told to us, and that doesn't stop being real. Like, it's never really referenced again, but like the events of the end of this story match up with what the Immortal Man tells us. And so in a weird roundabout kind of way, we do get to see the outcome of the future of Earth after all of these events take place. I just think that's really fucking cool. But yeah, there's so much about the end of Invincible that I really, 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 really like. And I just can't believe it's over. You know, I'm sat here, I've read the entire thing in 3 weeks. Like, I can't believe it's over. Meanwhile, there are people who read it every week, or every month, sorry, for 13 years who can't believe it's over. I know. Boo-hoo for me. I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to wait until the show is finished airing, and then I'm going to binge all of that as well, because I truly do think, from what I've seen and from what I've heard, that the show is just a little bit more improved. Like, the character of Debbie is fleshed out more in season 1 than she is in probably most of the comics, so I'm looking forward to that. Now, hopefully I was coherent in this video. I haven't gone back and listened to myself yet, but yeah, I think maybe the first few minutes of this video I already laid out like what I love so much about this book and how it deals with morality and stuff. But there is one more thing I want to say. I'm sat here talking about, oh, it's so good because of the things that it has to say about morality and other superhero comics and all that. The one thing I want to stress is it's just a solid, entertaining book. It doesn't necessarily have to be the most permanently life-affecting, like, thing. I don't think this book has really changed the way that I view the world. It might have changed the way I view superhero books a little bit, but I think season 1 of Invincible already did that to me a few years back. But this isn't like I've just finished Final Fantasy XIV or anything, you know? I'm not going to sit here and be like reconsidering the way I think about life. I think there are some things that this book said that I disagreed with. Like, despite all of this book's messaging about forgiveness, I do think that characters were a little too quick to forgive some pretty grievous shit sometimes. I do think that sometimes characters were a little bit too flexible in that they could be awful and then they could be really good people. I'm not sure some of that is quite so realistic. I do believe that people can change, but there's being able to change and then there's being able to kill people on a whim. And, you know, I'm mostly thinking of like the faction of Viltrumites who become friendly in such a short period of time, you know? Like, they were such awful people, they killed so many people, and then they spend a couple of months humanity and they're cured. You know, there's just some things I do disagree with in this book. But the main thing is, those things didn't stick out so sorely that they hindered my experience in any way, and it's just a solid, gripping read. It's so fun. It's so shocking and gory and violent, but also full of heart and hope at the end, and I really am fond. I'm just exceptionally fond, and I know I'm going to miss it. I don't know if there's, I know there's spin-off titles. I don't know if there's been any, like, sequel stuff. I think I saw the term Invincible returns at some point. I don't know if that's a thing I can go and read. I don't know if I want to yet. I think I love the end of this book too much. I was a little worried, like I said, with the whole volume 23, 22 I think it was, reboot question mark. That volume kind of annoyed me a little bit. We've talked about that. But I think it really did stick the landing with the final 3 volumes. Anyway, I think that's all I really have to say about this book, about Invincible in general. It's so good, And if you haven't read it, I've just spoiled it all for you. Why did you do that to yourself? You fool! Maybe you don't care about spoilers, it's still worth reading. Now I get to cast my gaze across more independent comics, or more non-Marvel and DC comics. What else should I explore next? I honestly don't know, but I've got this global comic subscription and it wasn't just for Invincible, so I'm gonna have a browse. I'm gonna have a leisurely flick through what they've got going on, and hopefully you will see some more non-Marvel and DC comic stuff from me, as well as plenty of Marvel and DC comic reviews from me as well. One thing's for sure, most of them aren't 25 bloody volumes long, so you'll probably get them more frequently. Although, I guess that doesn't make sense, because this is the first non-Marvel or DC review I've done, so it's not like you were expecting one. Either way, more in the future. Thanks for checking this out. I'll catch you next time. Oh, and please leave a like if you liked the video, and leave a comment if you got anything to say, and subscribe for more. I should really be saying those things at the ends of these videos, shouldn't I? Anyway, bye.